I know why we never returned to the moon. My grandpa was a pilot in the war. Even though he was always quiet, I liked him. When I got older, I realized he was always worried, looking for danger. He had a problem called shell shock, or PTSD. My mom said he wasn't always like that, but he changed when he came home from Vietnam. Maybe because of my grandpa's job, I was always crazy about space, astronauts, planes, and pilots. We'd talk about it when we were together. He was a big shot in the army and knew a bunch of people, even some famous astronauts. Once, I asked him if he'd met anyone who went to the moon. He said, "Don't ever talk to me about the moon, boy. It's a dark and evil place." He passed away in 2004, just got old. A couple of months ago, we decided to fix up my grandparents' old house. While we were cleaning out the attic, I found a box made of metal. Inside were a few things that belonged to my grandpa. There was a medal from the army, some papers, and an old picture of him with two other men I didn't know. My grandpa looked about 40, so I figured the picture was from the 1970s. All three men were wearing spacesuits in front of a plain, white background like NASA used. The logo was missing. The patch on their suits said, Dawnbreaker. I was confused. Was my grandpa an astronaut? Why didn't he ever tell anyone? I'd never heard of a mission called Dawnbreaker. Maybe it was kept secret. But why? The papers at the bottom of the box answered my questions. I'll write down what they said, but be warned, a lot of people might find it really scary. My dear family, if you ever find this, I have to tell you something. In 1972, I wasn't in Vietnam. I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but if you found this, it probably doesn't matter anymore. Back in 1965, a few other pilots and I were chosen to be astronauts. We worked for the government on secret space missions. We wouldn't be famous like other astronauts, but our country needed us. In early 1972, we were told that our country had a secret satellite orbiting the moon. They didn't say what it did or why it was there, but they said it crashed on the dark side of the moon a few weeks earlier. We didn't know why. The government needed to get the information from the satellite, so they sent me and two other astronauts to get it. The equipment from the Apollo 18 mission was given to us. We heard that the Apollo team was really angry. I guess the people who were in charge of us were way more powerful than NASA. The whole mission was super secret. Officially, I was sent to Vietnam, but in reality, we were getting ready for our mission. After a few months, we were at the launch pad standing in front of a giant rocket that would take us to the moon. I was the captain of the mission, Lieutenant Carver was the Lunar Excursion Module, LEM, pilot, and Lieutenant Ackerman was the Command Service Module, CSM, pilot. The trip to the moon took about 3 days. When we got there, we went around the moon a few times. Every time we went behind the moon, I felt a little helpless. We couldn't talk to anyone because the moon blocked the signal. The dark side of the moon wasn't like the side we see every day. It wasn't smooth and gray. It was covered with deep craters and holes, like it was being eaten by space. Finally, we started heading down to the surface. Me and Carver wished Ackerman good luck, and in our lunar module named Karen, we split off from the CSM called Trinity. After we said, Karen has landed, they didn't cheer. They just said, this is Trinity, congrats Karen. I'll tell everyone on the other side. Stay safe, guys. Just like that, we were cut off from the rest of the world. Ackerman was our only connection. When he was above the side of the moon that faces Earth, he could talk to ground control, but when he was above the dark side, he could talk to us. Never both at the same time. Even though the CSM went around the moon every 2 hours, we could only talk for about 35 minutes each orbit. We landed on a flat area inside a huge crater. It's not true what some people say. The sun shines on the dark side of the moon just like it does on the bright side. How much light there is depends on the moon's shape. It was still daylight where we landed, but we knew it would be dark in a few days. I was excited and curious about what we'd find on this strange world. We waited for about an hour and a half for Ackerman to relay the message from Command. We spent that time getting our suits ready. Command sends their congratulations. You're to proceed with the recovery. Everything was silent as I took my first step on the moon. I tried to think of something inspiring to say, but that time had passed. With Carver, we put together the rover and planted our flag next to our spaceship. Then, we drove away. As we drove across the moon, I saw something that looked like a flash of light. Maybe it was something shiny reflecting the light. It's kind of common to see flashes of light because of how space radiation interacts with your eyes. I didn't think too much about it, and I soon forgot. After driving for a couple of hours, we reached the satellite, or what was left of it. Something was wrong right away. There were a ton of footprints around the probe leading to 2 sets of tracks that went into the distance. What the heck is this? Carver said, shocked. I don't know, but it looks like someone got what we came for before us, I answered. The tracks and footprints were different than ours. Whoever took the data didn't come from America. Just like I thought, the data box wasn't there. We found the place where it was supposed to be, but it was missing. Luckily, we were just in contact with Ackerman, so we told him what we found. This doesn't make any sense. Who would take it? The Russians? They don't even have a lunar program. Even if someone took it, how could we not know? How can the Russians land on the moon without us noticing? He asked. As far as we know, the Russians have no idea we're here, said Carver over the radio. We're going to follow the tracks, I said, interrupting them. Are you guys sure about this? Asked Ackerman. Heck, I'm not sure. We're clearly missing something. But I'll do what you say, Cap, answered Carver. Yes. If whatever was on that probe was so important that 2 countries sent people here to get it, we have to figure out what happened, I replied. Copy that, Karen. I'll tell command where you are as soon as I can. Be careful out there. We were down to half our oxygen, but we kept going, hoping to solve the mystery. It didn't take long before I saw something in the distance. As we got closer, I realized it was a spaceship. It didn't look like ours, and it had the flag of the Soviet Union. For some reason, I felt really weird about it. If Russians were really there, they would have heard our radio a long time ago. So, there was no point in hiding. To the unidentified Soviet lander, this is the crew of Dawnbreaker. Please respond. We know you're here, we see you. Nothing. We tried to reach them several times, in both Russian and English, but we just got silence. We got closer and I realized why the spaceship felt weird to me. It looked like it had been there a while. We couldn't see much inside through the small windows, which were covered with something. We're running low on air, and I don't like this, Miller. We should really head back, said Carver. His voice was shaky. I know, but we have to figure out what's going on here. It took a while, but we finally figured out how to open the airlock. No one was home. The inside was a mess. Brownish red liquid was all over the place, maybe from food packets that were left open on the floor. Or maybe it was. No. I quickly pushed that thought away. It was a 2-seater ship. There were a few leftover supplies and samples, but no sign of the black box from the satellite. There was a spacesuit hanging on the wall near the airlock. 2 crew members, but one spacesuit had the name tag missing. We both realized that the other crew member had to still be out there somewhere, with his suit. By now, we were really low on oxygen, so we rushed back to our spaceship. As we reached Karen, with just a little oxygen left in our suits, I realized something. Tell me, Carver, was it just me, or did we not pass the wreckage on the way back? I asked. Heck. Don't even say it. It wasn't there, you're right. We shared our strange discovery with Ackerman, and he was as surprised as Command was when he told them. That night, I watched for the first 4 hours. It wasn't really night, since the sun was still out, but to keep track of time, we called the time when we were asleep night. When it was finally my turn to sleep, I had a dream that I was following the flash of light from the day before. I kept walking until I found the same spacesuit from the Russian ship. It was lying in the dust. The arms and legs were bent in awful ways, but you could see there was someone, or something, inside. I went closer and started to open the visor on the helmet. I was terrified when I saw the inside. It was my face, covered in brownish red blood. Instead of eyes, there were 2 big holes. The next day, we heard something on an unused channel on our radio. It was a faint signal from somewhere in the crater. We tried to play it on the speakers, but it didn't make sense. It was just a repeating sound, like someone saying one letter or vowel, but it was stretched out to 3 seconds, followed by another long pause. It was very distorted and definitely wasn't a loop, because each sound was just slightly different than the one before it. We ate and got ready for another moonwalk. It was darker than the day before. The sun was still shining, but it was going behind the horizon. We followed the signal for about an hour, and then we found something lying in the dust. I got tense as I looked closer. It was a spacesuit, just like the one in the Russian lander. "Well, looks like we found our missing friend," Carver said. He was in disbelief. I didn't say anything. I just jumped off the rover and slowly, silently walked toward the suit. "What are you doing, Miller?" Carver said. I was about to open the visor with my shaking hands when the suit came alive and grabbed my hand. I heard a weak pomogite in my suit, which means help in Russian. We brought him to our lander. The patch on his suit said Tarkov. He was shocked and not getting enough oxygen. I don't know how long he was lying there or why, but he was lucky to be alive. For the next couple of hours, he was in and out of consciousness. He finally woke up. Our Russian was bad, but he spoke English well enough for us to understand each other. He didn't remember why he was there, what happened to him and his crew, or what his mission was. When I looked out the window, I realized our flag was gone. There were no footprints. It looked like it just disappeared. We were all really worried and we asked to end the mission. Command refused and said getting the information from the satellite was really important. We decided to keep searching the next day and went to sleep. I had the same nightmare again. I woke up terrified and soaking in sweat. I saw Tarkov standing by the window, looking out. Then, he walked over to Carver and just stood there, looking at him as he slept for a minute or two. Quietly, I asked him, "Tarkov, what are you doing?" But he just mumbled something like, "them," or "when," and lay down. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept watching him, but nothing interesting happened. The next day, we found a picture, or a map, of the crater we were in a pocket of Tarkov's suit. A spot a few miles from where we were was marked with a cross. Tarkov didn't know what was there, but I realized that was the direction I'd seen the flash of light on the first day. We had to check it out. Me and Carver took off and headed to the mysterious place while Tarkov stayed in Karen. Our rover actually had enough power to take all three of us, but I said it didn't, and that he should stay behind. "I don't trust this guy," I said to Carver after I was sure Tarkov couldn't hear us. We land on the moon. We don't find the box, and suddenly the probe is gone. Then, we find this Russian who's supposed to be dead and he doesn't remember the last time he went to the bathroom. Now, we're heading towards a place on his map that he knows nothing about. You bet I don't trust him. "Heck, I don't trust a single step I take in that direction," he replied. "What are we going to do with him?" he asked later. "I don't know yet, but we can't take him with us. Neither the LEM or CSM is built for an extra passenger." "You know that," I answered. "And I'm afraid he knows that too," replied Carver. The sun was setting. After driving for a while, we reached something that still confuses me to this day. Right in front of us was something I can only call a three-sided pyramid. It was about 10 feet tall and its surface was completely smooth and black as night. "What in the world is this?" Carver asked, shivering. We walked around it and took pictures. "What the heck?" I heard over my radio. I turned around and saw Carver frozen, staring at something. There, in the little light that was left, was a spacesuit about 20 feet away from us. I recognized the missing name tag and realized it was the suit from the Russian ship. It was standing up on its feet. The visor was open, revealing a sight that terrifies me to this day. It was empty. The suit was empty, but it was standing upright. I came back to my senses when I heard a crackling noise on my radio. "You don't belong here," it spoke in a low, deep, distorted voice. Then, all of a sudden, a blinding flash of light hit me. When I could see again, the thing was gone. "Carver? Are you okay?" I asked. He was silent for a minute, and then said, "Man, heck NASA, heck the Army, heck the satellite, heck this whole mission. I want to get out of here, now." We didn't argue. We ran to the rover and drove back to Karen. When we got back, the sun had already gone down, and it was almost completely dark. The airlock was open and Tarkov was standing in front of the module in his suit. Damn it. In all the rush, we'd completely forgotten about him. I went towards him and started to say, "Listen, Tarkov, there's something you." I stopped when I saw he was holding something behind his back, but it was too late. He swung and hit me with a sharpened rod. I hit my head on the inside of my helmet and fell to the ground, dizzy. When the ringing in my ears stopped, I saw him and Carver fighting in the dust. I stood up and ran into Tarkov, pushing us both 12 feet away. Before I could get up again, he was already on top of me. We fought, and just as he got a hold of the lever that releases the helmet, I hit his head with a sharp rock. His visor cracked, and as air slowly escaped his suit, I stood up and grabbed the rod. It was already stained with blood. He lunged at me, but I stabbed him in the chest. He fell on top of me, and as our helmets touched, he said as the last of his air was sucked out of his lungs, "He is not your friend. Follow the voice." I stood up and went to Carver. I saw that his suit was punctured on his thigh, and brownish red blood was being sucked out into the vacuum. When I brought him inside Karen, I realized our first aid kit was gone. He was bleeding a lot. I managed to slow it down, but I had to treat him properly. I was afraid if we took off, he'd bleed out faster in zero gravity. "There was a med kit in the Russian thing, wasn't there?" he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Miller, you have to go and get it." "Heck. It's not that far from here, is it?" said Carver. "No, it's not. Are you sure you can hold on until I get back?" I asked. "Yeah, just go." So, I went. "Don't die on me, Carver." "That's an order," I said before I left. Like I said, it didn't take long to reach the Russian lander, but it felt like ages. The whole way, I was waiting for something to jump out of the darkness. I wasn't surprised to see the suit that was hanging on the wall was missing, but I still felt chills. I took their medkit and went back as fast as I could, but I couldn't stop thinking about Tarkov's last words. "He is not your friend. Follow the voice," I kept repeating in my head. Then, I switched the channel on my radio to the one where we'd heard the strange noise. It was still there. I realized the signal was stronger in one particular direction. "Follow the voice," I said to myself. Was this the voice Tarkov meant? Who is not my friend? Tarkov? Carver? The mission commander back on Earth? I had to find out. I drove off in the direction of the signal. After driving for at least 15 minutes, I reached a small crater, about 30 feet across. My headlights were on, and I saw something inside, but I couldn't make it out. I climbed over the edge and walked into the crater, turning the light to full brightness. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, for what felt like hours. In the center of the crater, there was a rectangle made of the same material as the pyramid. A body was lying on top of it. His arms and legs were twisted in the worst possible way. His eyes were missing and there were just 2 big holes in their place. It was Carver. A small box was shoved into his mouth. It was the black box from the satellite. I took the box and ran as fast as I could. Carver was dead. If Carver was dead, who was the Carver I left in Karen? "He is not your friend" was the only thing on my mind the rest of the way back. When I returned, Tarkov's body was gone, but Carver was still there, lying and bleeding. But it wasn't Carver. What was that thing? "Thank goodness you're back, Miller," said Carver. Not Carver. Carver was dead, broken, dead. "Miller, are you okay?" said the thing that wasn't Carver. "Yeah, I got the kit," I replied. He couldn't know I knew. It couldn't know. I treated its wound, and the bleeding finally stopped. I strapped him in, strapped it in, and then I strapped myself in. I didn't tell him that I'd found the black box. I didn't tell it I'd found him. The engine roared, and Karen split in half. The crew compartment pushed us up into space, while the legs stayed planted in the moon dust forever. Like I've written before, it felt like minutes passed by as if they were hours. The ascent and rendezvous only took about 12 minutes, but those minutes felt like decades. I wanted to scream so loud my lungs would burst, and I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't because it would find out. I wanted to pass out, but I couldn't. I had to save Ackerman. After several lifetimes, we finally docked with Ackerman and Trinity. We'd kept him updated the whole time, but seeing him in person was different. He was scared, but I was even more scared. He didn't know Carver wasn't Carver. I did. I unstrapped first and pushed Ackerman out of the docking tunnel. I kicked Carver, not Carver, right in the face when he followed. I closed the docking tunnel behind me. "What the heck are you doing, Miller? What is wrong with you?" Ackerman shouted, slamming me into the wall of the command module. "Don't open it, Mike. It's not Carver. That thing in the lem is not Carver, do you understand?" I shouted back in pain. Even though he was a tough soldier, Ackerman started crying. I floated past him to the controls, and before I undocked Karen, I looked at the window of the docking tunnel one last time. There it was. A thing with Carver's face and body, but not Carver. Staring at us. But his eyes were completely smooth and black as night itself. He opened his mouth in a way that wasn't possible for a human and let out a loud, disturbing screech that I wish I could forget. In a heartbeat, it went silent, as Karen detached from the CSM and drifted off into space. Me and Ackerman didn't say a word during the 3-day journey back to Earth. We were quarantined for months after we got home. Nobody ever explained what happened on the mission. I never learned what was on the black box. To be honest, I didn't want to know after everything I experienced. But whatever was on there was enough to cancel all future missions to the moon and beyond. Eventually, they released us and made it very clear that we were never supposed to talk about it. I never saw Ackerman again. The only time I talked about him was a couple of years after the mission when 2 men in suits came to my house. "Captain Miller, have you been in touch with Lieutenant Ackerman lately?" one of them asked after we said hello. "No, I haven't talked to him or heard from him since the mission." "Did something happen?" I replied. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but Lieutenant Ackerman was found dead in a nearby forest yesterday." I had to sit down. I didn't know him that well, but we spent a lot of time together training, and we went through hell together, so he was my friend. Poor Mike. "How did he die?" I asked. "We don't know yet. But he had a lot of broken bones in his arms and legs, and his eyes were gouged out." Part 2. https://www.reddit.com/r/no sleep/comment/856tjv/I_y_never_we_Richard_the_moon_part_2/closing parenthesis